Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Our topic today is spring football. Joining me with his thoughts is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. It's hard to believe, but the next time we see a down of Michigan football will be in September, when we tee it up for another season. Not that we want to rush spring or summer and everything there is to enjoy, but the anticipation for what the coming season could be is already off the charts. Jim Harbaugh has always been pretty flatline when discussing his team's upcoming seasons. He's always been a "we'll see what happens when we tee it up" kind of guy. Last Saturday, he sounded almost giddy in the postgame when discussing his current team, though. He said this is the best version of Michigan at this time of the year he has seen in his tenure as head coach. It's hard not to anticipate the fall when the head coach sounds so incredibly confident. In reality, it's April. We have 5 months to wait for the opener. In June, our preseason magazines will be on the shelf, and in July, we'll have media days. And then in August, camp gets underway. By then, the fan base should be at fever pitch in anticipation of another season of Michigan football. In the meantime, all we can do is look back on what we learned from spring football and speculate how it could translate on the field this fall. Joining me today with his thoughts on that and more is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. So stay with us. Joining us on our game day segment this week to talk Michigan football is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. Great to have you back with us, Aaron.
Mike, good to be back. It's been a while. There's a lot to talk about. Michigan just wrapped up spring practice. Let's do it.
Absolutely. I mean, just like that, spring practice is over, and we had the game on Saturday. A fairly entertaining game, I thought, as spring games go. One that was decided by a 2-point conversion, and as I said, all things considered, pretty good game to watch, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it seems like especially the last couple of years, Jim and his staff have kind of used the game as kind of just like a measuring stick tool. They like to play a lot of the younger guys we don't typically or not necessarily see or are used to seeing. So in a way, it's kind of a breath of fresh air. You see some guys you just haven't seen in years past. I think they use this game in a way to kind of gauge maybe who might be ready to play and, who's maybe, some of the standout guys from the spring. The assistant said it last week too. They know what they're going to get out of J.J. McCarthy. They know what they're going to get out of a Roman Wilson or Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards. They're looking to see what the other guys can do on the big stage in a way in the stadium. So it's good for that regard.
Well, it seems every spring we see a name or a couple of names pop up that we really haven't heard much about. And I suppose Peyton O'Leary was this year's surprise. We know he's on scholarship as of this year. He looked pretty good, though, didn't he?
He did. He's a name we've heard in the past, kind of sparingly. I can remember going back last spring and even a couple of fall camps ago. His name came up. I can remember Cade McNamara discussing him. I remember, I think last fall camp, J.J. McCarthy brought his name up, that he was kind of, standing out in practice and the like. Well, he kind of had his coming out party in a way on Saturday. He had 7 targets, more than any other receiver. He caught 6 of them, 126 yards. He had the game-winning 2-point conversion catch there at the end to win the game for the Maize team. So in a way, it was kind of his game on the offensive side of the ball. It looked great. He's kind of getting into the right spots at the right times. He was catching the ball on both sides of the field. There was one point there during the game where he caught back-to-back passes from J.J. McCarthy. It was basically the same route, just the other side of the field. So he looked good. It's good to see someone like him. He's worked hard in practice. He's played well enough to, like you said, have earned a scholarship, and that's certainly a big deal for these guys. I got to think going into fall camp, he's kind of worked himself into, at least, on the depth chart. He's probably going to have opportunity to play this fall if he can keep it going. Having
a great spring is important to get you into the conversation in that receivers room, but it is one deep group, isn't it?
Yeah. And there are spots, I think, open. Obviously, everyone wants to point to Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson. Obviously, those are kind of the top guys. I think folks are expecting more from Darius Clemens this year. I think he can get an opportunity. He played quite a bit there in the spring game. He caught 2 balls, but there are spots open, I think. Michigan's shown that they didn't throw the ball a ton last year. I'm not expecting them to do so again this year. I think there's an opening, an opportunity for a Peyton O'Leary. He's going to have to, again, put together a good fall camp, show that he can kind of put it together consistently on a regular basis. But he certainly earned the trust of the coaching staff, and I think that was borne out with the scholarship, when he got one. He was featured in the spring game, and guys don't have big spring games if they're not doing something right. Obviously he played well in practice, but he was getting open. He was getting in the right spots. He's creating separation from the defenders, and more importantly, he was catching the football. If you're a receiver, that's obviously the biggest deal. So, he's tall, lanky, didn't get a ton of yards after the catch, but he's certainly, I saw some comparisons to maybe a Cooper Kupp type receiver. I'm not ready to go there yet. But he certainly looked good.
Well, during spring practice, we were hearing JJ's bigger physically and just keeps getting better and better. A lot of his teammates were saying that. And, Saturday's performance aside, because I think that led people to think we're going to see this just incredible outing from JJ on Saturday. But, I think the difference is this year he knows he's the man, and he seemed very relaxed. And that's a good thing for a young quarterback of his ability, isn't it?
Exactly. I think for the first time in several years now, there's no question mark at quarterback. I can remember a couple years ago with Cade McNamara, the question was, well, could JJ beat him out? There was always this question over his shoulder, him kind of looking over his shoulder. That's not the case here with JJ. He knows he's a starter. He's been named the starter. In a way, I think that's good for his psyche, his mentality. He doesn't have to overextend himself, doesn't have to necessarily go out there and prove anything. So he's in a better position. He has put on a few pounds. He says he's just as fast as he was last year. I think the weight gain is probably a good thing, just to try to curb, any potential injuries. Because as we saw last year, he wasn't afraid of getting hit, and I think that's obviously a big part of his game, kind of breaking out of the pocket and picking up yards on the ground. But he looked just fine Saturday. He overthrew a couple balls, one was intercepted. I think he settled in as the game went on and looked better. And really, that's all you want. He's still getting the cobwebs out. Remember, he didn't throw it all last spring. He wasn't part of the spring game. He didn't do any of that stuff. So in a way, he's kind of got a head start from where he was last year, on top of the full season of playing and obviously starting games and everything else. So he's in a good spot. Michigan's happy with what they have, obviously. I think the game is slowing down for him. And you hear that a lot from younger guys, just the fact that he's got a full year under his belt. He's been in big situations. I really think the loss to TCU and the way he played in that game stung a little bit. I think it's motivated him in a way. So I'm really curious to see how he looks out of the gate this fall. There's still plenty of time to go, obviously. But as long as he can stay healthy and remain in good spirits, I think he's primed for a big year.
Yeah, I think you're right. The key there is keeping him healthy. I don't think any of us are worried about what he's going to do on the field this fall. But we were watching the backups and to see what that situation is like. I thought it was interesting. Jack Tuttle looked pretty good, a little more mobile than I remember him being at Indiana. Davis Warren had his moments. I like him. Alex Orji, still a guy that's really a fascinating prospect. But the quarterback room seems to be in pretty good shape, at least depth-wise, doesn't it, Aaron?
Yeah, they're really happy with where they are there. I think the addition of Jack Tuttle in the offseason was key. He's a guy who started games in Indiana. He was a captain. He's really experienced. He's been around the game, several years. I think he's a fifth-year guy. So, he knows what it's like to play in college football. Michigan kind of had that last year with Alan Bowman. Again, another guy who was a very experienced starter and been around the game a while. So I think the addition of Jack Tuttle was key. I think at this point it sounds like he has passed up Davis Warren, at least for the backup job. I've been told that he looked really good in spring. The coaches were very happy with how quickly he kind of picked up the playbook and the offense. But yeah, Davis Warren looked good again on Saturday. 8 of 13, he threw for 163 yards, more than any other quarterback. His arm, and I've been saying this now for a year and a half. I remember last year's spring game where he kind of shined. He's going to be a star one day. I don't know if it's going to be at Michigan or somewhere else, but man, he's good. So I think from a backup perspective, Michigan's happy with where they are. We did see a little bit more of Alex Orji's arm this time. I think most of what we saw last year was him running the football. Saturday, he threw 4 of 6 for 47 yards and a touchdown. So we saw a little bit of his arm. He had a nice 41-yard pass there. So Michigan's quarterback room, I said this last year, and I believe it again this year, maybe more so. I don't think their quarterback situation has ever been better under Jim Harbaugh. I think with JJ obviously leading the pack, and you've got experienced guy with Tuttle and a guy who I think can go in and still win games, and Davis Warren on top of the younger guys. they're in great shape, whether JJ can stay healthy or not. Obviously, you want him to. You don't want to have to dip into the backup role, but sometimes it's a necessity. And I think Michigan's in great shape there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think under Coach Jim Harbaugh, this is the best the quarterback room has been, so I'm not too worried about that. When we listen to the news, and we get very little of it really leaks out of Schembechler Hall during the spring, you try to glean whatever information you can. One of the things I did like, though, on Saturday was seeing linebacker Nakai Hill-Green back out on the field. And, all last year we kept wondering, what's wrong? What's wrong with the guy? The coaching staff was so high on him, but it sounds like he's all the way back from last year's injury, doesn't it, Aaron?
Yeah. In fact, we spoke to him after the game, and he says he feels 100%. He was moving fine, looked good. We heard early in spring that he's back at full-time practicing. So things seem to be on the up and up with him, on the arrow pointing up. You're right. He tried to get, and we talked to him after the game, and he said, he tried giving it a go several times last year. I can remember, in a couple of games where he actually suited up and was on the field for pregame warmups and just didn't end up playing. But he was dealing with a soft tissue injury. He wouldn't go into any more detail than that. And that was kind of how Michigan characterized it as well last year. But he's ready to go. It adds more depth for the Michigan linebacker room. It was something Jesse Minter, defensive coordinator, discussed last week or a few weeks back, and that Junior Colson about a month ago, they couldn't rotate much in middle linebacker last year. They kind of had to lean on 2 or 3 guys and kind of roll the dice and go with it. And luckily, they didn't get injured and they were pretty healthy. It worked out just fine. But having Nakai Hill-Green back is key. I mean, he's a guy again who has starting experience. At this point now, he's kind of an experienced vet. He's been around the game a while. Assuming he can stay healthy, it really, on top of the additions at the middle linebacker, Ernest Hausman from Nebraska, similar to the quarterback situation. Michigan, I think, is in a great spot at middle linebacker. They haven't been as deep as this, I think, in a couple of years now. You got really 4 or 5 guys that can kind of plug in and play there. I think you're going to see better play out of the middle linebacker role. You've got Chris Partridge back at coaching that position, so I think that's a good thing as well. Hill-Green, I think, adds a lot. He's going to bring a lot to the table. And assuming he can stay healthy, he should produce quite a bit.
From what little we've seen of him in the past, he looks like a very, very fast linebacker, a very talented kid. So it's all good, and you're right. The depth in that linebacker room, like so many other positions on this team, really good heading into the fall. I think a lot of us had been waiting to see Josiah Stewart in action too, the transfer from Coastal Carolina. And of course, we're going to find out more in the fall what he brings to the defense. But at least from what we hear and what we saw Saturday, he does look like a disruptive force, doesn't he?
I was real impressed with him on Saturday. In fact, he had 5 tackles, he had a sack, a couple TFLs. It seemed like he was all over the place. And that's kind of, his resume from Coastal Carolina. He came in as a true freshman there and lit up the stat sheet. Double-digit sacks. He had a couple forced fumbles. He was really a big disruptive playmaker. The question then becomes, can you do it at the bigger stage? He played well at the Sun Belt. He was a 2-time All-Sun Belt player. Played as well as you'd expect. In the way you can make the argument, you probably hit a ceiling there. And he kind of admitted this. So he was another guy we talked to after the spring game on Saturday. He said he's here at Michigan to kind of prove that he can do it at this level. He wants to, play a role and kind of disrupt opposing offenses. And I think Michigan thinks they can get that out of him. Now, the knock on him is he's a little bit undersized. I think he's listed at 225. Typical edge rushers in the last few years from Michigan, they're pushing 245, 260, in some cases 270. So he is undersized, but he is quick. He's got a good first step and first move. We'll see if that can translate. Michigan tried this a few years back with Michael Dana, again, a former All-MAC guy, big numbers at Central Michigan. And he kind of came in and played, a role where he was in certain packages, didn't play every down, but he was effective. I'm really curious if Josiah Stewart can kind of top that, if he can become an every down guy, play, and put up big numbers. Because Michigan right now at this point, they're looking for consistency in the edge rushing role. Obviously, Braden McGregor is back. They like what Jalen Harrell brings. They got a couple of guys there, but no kind of obvious number one, kind of like they've had in years past. Josiah Stewart thinks he can be that guy. He's not necessarily trying to be that guy, but he said he's willing to do whatever he's told or whatever they're willing to have him do. But he's certainly a good addition. Another, I think, key transfer portal ad that they got this offseason. Former teammate of Mike Sam was still in high school, so he kind of vouched for him as well. But by all accounts, right now, they like what they've seen on Josiah Stewart.
And I think Jim Harbaugh mentioned this earlier during spring practice that Josiah Stewart, yeah, he's a little bit undersized. You can get him bigger, but I think what Jim said earlier in the spring, and then we saw Saturday, is he's got that twitch, that first step that you just can't coach.
No, you can't. And I think that really separates the elite pass rushers from those guys who just don't put up the big numbers. So I think they're expecting big things out of him. We'll see. I'm really curious to see how his play translates to the Big Ten level. Obviously, it's a different game, obviously a little bit faster, and you got bigger linemen. But he seems to think he can do it. I'm really curious to see. He's going to be obviously a big storyline to watch this fall, because if they can even get maybe half the pass rushing production that he put up at Coastal Carolina, that certainly can help benefit the Michigan defense.
No, I agree with that. Well, another two guys that impressed on defense were Kenneth Grant and Derek Moore. And I know there was an emphasis this spring, I should say, from Jesse Mitter to get more production, more pressure from those defensive linemen. Those guys looked good, didn't they?
Yeah, and in fact, Kenneth Grant, it was kind of revealed afterwards that he was actually the number one pick for the spring game. So now part of it obviously was I think the teams are drafting based on guys who they felt can last most of the game, who can play most of it. Obviously, guys like JJ and the big timers weren't going to play the entire game. But Grant that just goes to show how well received and how well liked, and I think how good of a spring he's had. The fact that they were willing to take a number one. So I think, again, he's another guy where I think Michigan's expecting big things out of the defensive tackle spot this fall. He's certainly, I think, gotten in better shape this year. I think that was a knock against him last year. He just couldn't go in big spurts. He was very inconsistent. So we'll see if he can put that together. If so, I think Michigan's defensive tackle line, the defensive tackle position, again, is in great shape. Derek Moore, he was another guy who put up big numbers on Saturday, 7 tackles, 2 TFLs. We've heard a lot of things about him the last year or so. He came in last year. I think the coaches really liked him, and I think he had to put together his freshman year, kind of learn the ropes and the defense and everything else. But he's a guy I think they're expecting to take that second year leap, put up and play regularly. Again, two guys. I think this Michigan defense, it's really a very similar situation to last year. There aren't a ton of potential stars, guys that maybe aren't going to be all Americans, but if they get enough production on enough guys and put it together, again, I think the defense can be just as good as last year, if not better.
Well, we didn't see over on the offensive side most of the offensive line starters on Saturday, and that's okay with me. But it's good to see there is a lot of young depth up front and a lot of developing talent, isn't there, Aaron?
Yeah, in fact, I kind of noted the starters, and there was certainly a split group. They played a lot of guys. Some guys we'd seen last year, some we didn't. You saw guys like Andrew Gentry, who kind of came in last year and surely impressed. Trevor Keegan and Zach Sinter, obviously, but the obvious guys. Dominic Gadis, former defensive tackle, who's moved to the offensive line, was a starter on Saturday. Trente Jones, a familiar name. I think this group is probably deeper than it was last year. I'm obviously hold out judgment whether it's better than it was last year, but I mean, you got to give Sharon Moore and the Michigan coaching staff credit for just building this room. I mean, they've got so many guys. I think they legitimately think they're 2 and 3 units deep there. Guys, I think they feel comfortable putting in. There's going to be a lot of position battles this fall camp. They did have several guys sit out. Zach Sinter did not play. A couple of the transfers, Miles Hinton, Drake Nugent didn't play. Darius Henderson, the transfer from Arizona State, still isn't here yet. So they got a lot of figuring out to do there. But fall camp is going to be key there. I think you got to look at a lot of guys battling for really a few positions, because at this point, I got to think Sinter and Keegan are starters. Folks are talking like Barnhart's pretty much a starter at this point. So there's only about 2 or maybe 3 spots that are open. So fall camp is going to be fascinating, because you got so many guys here, I think, ready to break out, guys willing ready to play more. Giovanni Ohadi is another guy that he started on Saturday. Raheem Anderson, that center position is going to be fascinating too. So they got a lot going on. Sharon Moore deserves a lot of credit for building this room. Because at this point, to be frank with you, I'm surprised some of these guys just haven't transferred just based on opportunity, because some of these guys could probably start at most other Big Ten schools, certainly in other schools across the country. So they're deep, they're big. I think they're hungry. And I think there's a chance they can be certainly better than they were last year.
I agree with you completely. You nailed it there. I mean, Sharon Moore deserves so much credit, he and Jim Harbaugh, because you look around, watch any college game in the fall now. I would say most teams are not that deep on the offensive line. You have the 85 scholarship limit. You're right. Why don't some of these kids transfer out, especially in this day and age, to get their opportunity somewhere else. But Michigan is really stockpiling offensive linemen, almost like they did in the 70s and 80s, which is very impressive in this era of college football.
It is. It is. I think Michigan recognized early on that, and I think we talked about this in the past in our podcast, but when other teams are zigging, Michigan kind of zagged. They've gone a different way, and they've really emphasized the guys up front, the run game, the physicality portion of the game. It's worked for them, obviously, in the last couple of years. They've beaten Ohio State because of it. They've dominated the Big Ten. Again, they're probably the favorites to win the conference again this fall, and the offensive line and the guys up front are a big reason why.
Well, another eye-opener on Saturday, I thought, was running back Benjamin Hall. He's the freshman from Georgia. As Mike Hart was saying, he's built like a grown-up man already. An intriguing prospect. And I think what's really fascinating to me is, if we remember last year at the, midway through the recruiting cycle, a lot of analysts were saying, hey, this kid fell to second or third string on his high school team. And a lot of people were saying, hey, maybe Michigan won't honor that scholarship. But now that he's on campus, and you look at him physically, I mean, yeah, he is a stud. He looks really impressive, doesn't he?
I was blown away by his performance on Saturday. We've obviously heard about him, his potential and his size and everything else. He's listed at 5'11", 235. And as you said, Mike Hart and some of the coaches have described his legs as tree trunks. I mean, he was really pushing the pile and getting scrapping for every yard he can get. I really think there's probably a potential he can push for, number 3 running back in this fall. Obviously, he's not going to beat out, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. But just like quarterback, I think Michigan's got a really good situation going at running back. And Mike Hart acknowledged as much Saturday after the spring game. He said, he can't remember the Michigan running back room being this deep. He's got several options. You mentioned Hall. I mean, you forget about C.J. Stokes and Tavir Dunlap, but the guys that have been here a couple of years. Cole Cabana, another true freshman who I think he has big things ahead of him. He didn't play in Saturday's spring game, but I think he's going to be available this fall. Mike Hart's got a lot to work with. You got to think Michigan's going to utilize the running backs, quite a bit this fall, given the fact that obviously Corum and Edwards are back. I think they're still kind of in the way searching for that short yardage back. I think that's an area where Hall maybe could fit in. He had 13 carries, 96 yards, a touchdown on Saturday. And as Mike Hart said, he could have had a couple more if he didn't. I think one situation he ran out of bounds, another he dropped the ball running. So he's still obviously a true freshman, still learning the game, still kind of getting his wits about him. But he looked really good. He's still raw, but they got some work to do. But you gotta like what you saw. Michigan's again going back to the offensive line. They're stacked up front. That includes the running back room. They got plenty of options there. Khalil Mullins, another guy who's back this year. He had 9 carries on Saturday for 35 yards and a touchdown. We saw him quite a bit last year. I'm real curious to see how they utilize the running back, because you got to think Corum and Edwards are going to kind of use up most of the oxygen there in the room. I got to think maybe we'll see both of them on the field at times quite a bit this fall, just to try and get some of these other guys involved. But I think more important, they're building depth. Injuries have been an issue the last couple of years with Corum and Edwards, as we've seen. And Michigan kind of had to fill that gap. They didn't really have an answer last year, at least a reliable guy. I think that the task this year is finding that. And if they can get, consistency out of Hall or Mullings or C.J. Stokes, Michigan's running back room is going to be in better shape than it was last year or the year before.
Yeah, I think we all agree with that. One of the fun things, though, about the spring game is we get to see a lot of kids who will probably never see the field during their 4 or 5 years at Michigan. That's always great for morale for the program, get them out there in the big house playing ball. But we get surprises every spring, and we hear rumbles in the media from the beat writers and the coaching staff. But were there any other names that popped up this spring or in the game Saturday that impressed you?
Well, Maureen Walker's name has been brought up a ton this fall, and I'm sure you've discussed on your podcast. And he's kind of been penciled in right now as a potential starter, at quarter. They just like his length and his athleticism and his speed. I think they think that can translate to the defensive side of the ball. He's obviously played receiver last year. He played Saturday. He wasn't very impressive to me. He still seems like work in progress, but they seem dead set on obviously, playing him at that position. He got quite a bit of run on Saturday. He looked good at times. Obviously, he looked like a first-year DB to me and others, but he certainly got a lot of playing time. So I think he's obviously the guy to watch this fall. They continue to use a lot of those former walk-on running backs, Isaiah Gash, Leon Franklin. Franklin got a ton of run on Saturday. I'm really curious to see what happens there. Again, another deep running back room, as I mentioned. Guys that we're still waiting to break out, waiting on. Christian Dixon at receivers, a guy he played a little bit Saturday, didn't do much. I mentioned Darius Clemens, we're kind of waiting on him. But, A.J. Barner, I think he's a guy who flashed and we haven't really discussed yet. Again, another former transfer, tight end guy, former captain of Indiana. I think Michigan expects him to be kind of that 1-2 with Colston Loveland. They're going to utilize tight ends a bunch this fall. I have no doubt about it. He had 3 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown. Another big physical tight end that I think can obviously block, is a willing blocker, but can go out and catch balls as well. So it's funny. We talk about all these names and all these options Michigan's going to have. I don't know how they're going to feed the ball to all these guys. And I think that's going to be the biggest task this fall. And we haven't even talked about the receivers really. So they got a lot of options. They got a lot of depth, a lot of guys with experience. And they're going to be a fun watch this fall, I think.
Well, I thought it was interesting after the game that Jim said something like, and I'm paraphrasing now, that this is the best version of a Michigan football team at this time of the year since he's been here. And I know it's his job to build up this team, but we, through the years, when Jim was at Stanford, when he was in the NFL, he's not given to hyperbole. He usually just is so deadpan when he's talking about his team and the prospects for the upcoming season. But he just seemed giddy after the game on Saturday, as if he knows he's loaded up.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. He doesn't typically say something like that. So when he does, it typically means something, and it's typically true. So he's clearly happy. As I mentioned, they're deep, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They've got a lot of options, a lot of guys back on defense, playmakers. They got most of the coaching staff back, which is something Jim hasn't really had in a year-to-year basis since he's gotten to Michigan. So everything's really intact here. They've got a lot of momentum, obviously, coming off back-to-back Big Ten championships. They know where they're at. I think they acknowledge that they've kind of made that leap. They're where they want to be. Now the question becomes, can they get to that ultimate goal by winning a national championship? They've been in the playoff now twice. They came closer than ever last year to getting the national championship, just couldn't do it. Now it's about getting there and winning it. They've acknowledged that's the goal this year, national championship or bust is basically what they said. That's not something we've heard in previous years. They realize, I think they're at the party now that now they got to get in there and just and have fun. So it's going to be a fascinating season. As I mentioned, they're going to be the favorites in the Big Ten again, and so there's a lot going right here.
Well, there was a lot going on as far as news in spring during practice. Also, big contracts handed out to Sharon Moore, Jesse Minter, and as Jim says, the X Factor, Ben Herbert. For all three of those guys, it was a well-deserved raise, wasn't it?
Yeah, I reported earlier this week on MLive.com that all three of them received new contracts within the last couple of months. All included pay raises, some a lot, some significant. In fact, Sharon Moore got 2 different pay raises this offseason. Him and Minter, their base pay has been pushed over $1 million a year. Both Minter and Moore both signed 3-year extensions. I guess I should clarify. So they're certainly under contract for a while. Their pay has been obviously boosted as a result of the success that they've had, and rightfully so. Both made more than $1 million this past year when you include incentives and on-field performances and the like. But their base pay is now going to be pushed over $1 million guaranteed. So well-deserved raises for them. Ben Herbert, I think, was the eye-opener, at least for me, when I got the contracts back. I'm kind of pouring through the details, trying to compare to what it was before. And Ben Herbert, he was at this point last year, he's collecting an annual salary of, I think, $600,000 on top of a $100,000 retention bonus. He's going to now be making more than $1 million a year. My quick research, he's, I think, going to be only the second strength coach in the country making $1 million a year. So Jim Harbaugh has been very complimentary of him and the job he's done. I think we've all seen it in terms of just the growth some of the players have made physically. He deserves it. Like you said, described him as the X factor, kind of their missing or their guy, and he's going to be paid reflective of that. Guaranteed $1 million a year salary going forward. He signed a 5-year deal, so I don't see Ben Herbert going anywhere anytime soon either.
No, absolutely, and of course, Jim seems to really love him, calls him the X Factor. But you hear the players talk about him. I haven't heard Michigan players talk about a strength and conditioning coach like this since back in the day when Mike Gittleson was here. So the proof's in the pudding.
It is, and folks, I think, don't realize how much time the players spend around the strength coaches. There's a period here in the off season, spring practice is over, where the coaches aren't technically allowed to have much contact with the guys, especially they're not allowed to run practices. They're not really allowed to be around in the weight strength, the weight room. And that's where Ben Herbert and his staff kind of come in. They're around these guys pretty much all day, every day. They're guiding their goals, whatever these guys are trying to do. They lose weight, gain weight, add muscle, lose fat, whatever the case may be. So they really developed this bond with Herbert. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen his name, mentioned so often, so frequently. Guys are seeing gains, in the weight room. They're seeing gains with their production on the field. And they're crediting, obviously Herbert for being kind of that foundational piece behind it. Obviously, the coaches are guiding from a skill perspective and X's and O's playbook perspective. But to do that, you got to be in peak physical shape. And Ben Herbert clearly has these guys in that.
Well, between now and the season, there'll be a lot of speculation going on about what's going to happen when we tee it up in September. But recruiting is going to be front and center for the next couple of months for good reason. And last week, big news when Jaden Davis, the 4-star from Charlotte Providence State, committed. And, we know a lot of the fan base was disappointed that last year's class was, not what we thought it should have been, coming off of back-to-back Big Ten championships, back-to-back playoff appearances. But that said, there were a lot of talent in that class too. But with Jaden committing, that seems like he's the kind of player that there could be a ripple effect and things could really take off in the next couple of months with commitments. Don't you think, Aaron?
I do. I think Michigan, from a momentum standpoint, I don't think I've seen, since I've been on the beat since 2017, I haven't seen them have this type of momentum in recruiting probably ever. They're doing great. You mentioned Jaden Davis. They signed the high 4-star guy, Jordan Marshall, the running back from Ohio. They're clicking on all cylinders at this point. I think finally the winning and the Big Ten championships and the playoff appearances are, I think, paying off. Last year, there was a lot of question marks about Jim Harbaugh and his future at Michigan, whether he's going to stay or go. And I think some of that's been put to bed. Jim was pretty honest last year about it, pursuing an NFL gig. This year, it didn't feel the same. I think Jim was willing to listen to offers, but wasn't necessarily desired to go to the NFL. So I think players have heard that. I think he's been pretty, from what I've been told, and we spoke to outgoing guys at the NFL Combine, that Jim's been pretty transparent and honest on a year-to-year basis about what his plans are. And I think he plans to stick out at Michigan for the long haul. I think players are recognizing that. That's translating to recruiting, and obviously winning matters too. Players want to go, recruits want to go where you're winning. They want to go into the biggest spotlight. I think Michigan's improved from an NIL perspective a little bit. I think that certainly helped. And I think, too, the big-time recruits, too, are looking around the country and realizing that maybe NIL isn't all it's cracked up to be at some of these bigger programs where they were, dishing out lots of money and the success necessarily wasn't happening in the field. You're starting to see kind of NIL deals fall apart at other schools. So I think, in a way, Michigan's become obviously the obvious option based on success, but in a way it's a safe option too. The coaching staff's done a very good job of developing guys and turning them into NFL caliber players. And it's translated. Jaden Davis is a big pickup. I mean, the biggest since J.J. McCarthy, a 5-star kid, top 30 in the country. Depending on the recruiting service, he's probably either the number 1 or number 2 quarterback in the class. So Michigan certainly had a home run there. I think as long as Jim Harbaugh and the staff can kind of nab a big-time quarterback, probably every other class, they're going to be in good shape. And they're certainly with that with Jaden Davis. But, yeah, a lot of recruiting momentum. Michigan's finally starting to hit on some of these Ohio kids for so long. We had, folks that criticized Michigan's recruiting in the state of Ohio. They kind of ignored the state because Ohio State was doing so well. But now that they're beating Ohio State on a regular basis, winning the championship and kind of front and center in college football, I think that's resonating with some of these kids that maybe, poo-poo Michigan in previous years.
I agree with that, and stay tuned. It should be an interesting couple of months heading into fall camp, because I think we're going to have a lot of commitments there and some good news. So we'll see. Final question before we let you get away, Aaron. Between now and the opener, we know the hype and the anticipation is going to build each week. It's April now, but that's the way it happens every year. You get into the summer and, man, people are ready. Get us our Wolverine preseason magazine and Athlon and everything else. And that's great with me. But I think the fans all know and expect that this year Michigan football could have a season to remember. The expectations are enormous right now, aren't they, Aaron?
They are. They're as big as they've been. I mean, since Jim Harbaugh got here, maybe other than that first or second year. But the fact that they've been able, again, to duplicate the success, win the Big Ten and get into the playoff. I mean, there's no higher, no higher ceiling here. You've got to. They've been there. They've been in the dance. Now it's about winning it. And they acknowledge that. I think that's been the stated goal this year. They're not shying away from that. Last year was an incredible year. I mean, they beat both rivals. They won the Big Ten again. They came a score away really from getting the national championship. They feel like there's more to be had there. I think they're hungry. I think the culture has never been better. I mean, you've got guys coming back that I think in previous years, if this was 2 or 3 years ago, like a Blake Corum, a Trevor Keegan, Zach Sinter, I think they would have went to the NFL. That's just not the case now. They're sticking around longer than maybe should have. Again, it's a testament to what I think Jim Harbaugh and the coaching staff have built. They've got congruity there. They've got consistency. They've got something brewing. Something is brewing here. Again, I've been around this team since 2017, and I can't think of another time where things have been so great. And I'm not just saying that. The players seem genuinely happy to be there. The coaches are happy to be there. Success is happening on the field and off the field. And they're in a great place. Jim Harbaugh's, to his credit, a few years back, I can remember talking, folks were wondering about his future and whether he was the guy to kind of lead Michigan to the, college football's pinnacle. And some were doubting him. To his credit, he's turned things around. He's got things heading, obviously, in a great position. Now it's about getting over the hump now and winning a national championship.
Absolutely, and you hope that our fan base realizes these are the good times. Yeah, it took a while to get here, especially for we older fans that remember the good old days. Yeah, there's been sort of a drought, but enjoy this. This kind of success in any program does not happen all the time, so get ready for the fall and the anticipation, and it should be a fun season. So with us today has been Michigan beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. Aaron, always a pleasure having you on the show, and I know you get a little bit of a downtime now in the next couple of months before things heat back up, so I'm sure we'll have you back on soon talking about the upcoming season. But as always, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Always great to be with you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
On Quick Hits today, we're getting the show up on Thursday afternoon, so we don't have an update on the Frozen Four and Michigan's matchup with Quinnipiac. You'll probably know the outcome of the game by the time you hear this show. Let's hope the boys can punch in a few against what is a stingy defense and advance to the NCAA championship games on Saturday. It's been another great season for Michigan hockey, and let's hope it ends with them holding the championship trophy when this weekend ends. Juwan Howard and basketball are regrouping after all of the recent departures, some expected, some not. It's going to be an important offseason for his program, to say the least. Next week, we hope to have radio play-by-play voice Brian Bush join us to take a look back at this season and get his thoughts on what's next for Michigan basketball. That does it for now, though. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a blessed and happy Easter, everyone. Make sure you tell your family and friends about the show, and join us again next week. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!